allowing their children to marry other people because they are of a different religion, or they're of a different ethnicity, right, and so forth. People, in some cases, actively persecuted, right, on those grounds, right, and so forth. The argument that liberals will make, as we can find it here, is that it's only in societies that make, as a matter of principle, respect for freedom, that you will get religious tolerance and various other associated tolerances. They'll make it as a matter of history. It's only in countries like England, and a little bit later Scotland, France, some of the Western European countries, and then countries directly affected by that Western European heritage, Canada, my home country, the United States, where you had a culture of individual freedom, encouraging people to be individuals, that religious toleration developed. The separation of church and state as a matter of political principle was first enunciated in England in the 1680s during the rise of this trend, and then it has since spread across the world. And the argument makes sense here, right? If we say people should be free. Of course, there's existential freedom, right? Freedom with respect to your body, freedom with respect to commerce, but there's also intellectual freedom, cognitive freedom, being free to think for yourself. To think for yourself on all of the important issues in life, including religious issues, philosophical issues, right, and so forth. So if it's a matter of principle that people should be free, then that applies to religion, right, as well. And so you did see that principle argument made very consistently. I might disagree with your religious views, and you might disagree with mine, but it's still your life, it's still your choice. I have to respect that. And I can argue with you and try to convince you to change your mind, right, at most, but I can't use any sort of force against you. It still has to be that you ultimately decide for yourself. All right, next, going down here now. The argument also is that sexism and racism decline in the liberal societies as well as a matter of historical record. I don't know if you know these dates, right, or not, but first time in history, the idea that there's something morally wrong with slavery, and then you have a significant number of intellectuals who then became active against slavery. First society was in the United States, 1787, then 1788 in France and England, and they were making classic liberal arguments to say human beings are human beings, right, no matter what their ethnic origin, no matter what their racial origin, and freedom is the natural birthright, so to speak, of every single human being. So slavery is odious as an institution, and then you start to see the rise of institutions to combat slavery, and then over the course of a century it was largely eliminated from the rest of the world as well. Same thing holds with respect to sexism. The first feminist manifestos ever written, right, in human history were written in 1791 in England. Mary Wollstonecraft, mother of Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. Olympe de Gouges, right, in France, and then some early American authors. And they're all taking the language directly out of Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, they apply to everyone as a matter of principle. Freedom for everyone. So sexism and racism decline as a matter of principle if you take individual freedom seriously. And it's always the societies that don't take individual freedom very seriously that don't have as much of a problem, taking certain groups of people and taking their freedoms away, keeping them subordinate in various respects. We can also, just the arrow I've got here ties it into the profit motive, but to the extent that you have free societies, you have free market or capitalist kind of societies that emerge as well, there's also lots of historical evidence that the freest places historically were always the free ports. Those kind of islands where there were places like Tangier or Beirut, right, or Hong Kong, or New Orleans, where kind of the normal political environment didn't prevail in these ports, and then what you had was people from all over the world coming in on ships to trade with each other. And what they found was, of course, all those people are there to make money, right? They were at the profit motive. But you found these really bizarre things going on, like Christians were trading with Jews, and Jews were trading with Muslims, and they're all trading with Buddhists. and even atheists and agnostics in the early days could come along. So you had people being tolerant, right, with respect to each other because the profit motive gave them the incentive to overlook these irrational isms. I don't know, here's an example. Actually, this is where I'm at my center. We're hiring right now. We're in the early stages, so we'll be collecting resumes. So we'll just imagine this thought experiment. Suppose I want my center to grow, or we change the example of business. I want to make a lot of money in my business, and I'm hiring. And I've got two candidates, say, who hire, and one of them is a woman, and one of them is a man. But suppose I'm a sexist, just really old-fashioned sexist. I just don't want to work with women. I have all these attitudes with respect to women, and so forth. But here's my situation, right? The woman who's applying for the position had straight A grades in university. She just graduated. And the man who's applying had C+ average. He also just graduated. Which one will I hire? How much am I willing, so to speak, to pay for my sexism? And now in that case, I will be conflicted. The profit-seeking capitalist in me will say, I should hire the woman. Obviously, she's smarter, she works harder, she's going to enable me to make a whole lot more money. The sexist in me will say, I'm going to hire the man just because I want to work with the man and not the woman. But the profit motive, to the extent that it's operative, is going to give me an incentive to overlook my sexism. And it's a culture where you have a very business-friendly culture that you find sexist attitudes start to decline. Same thing, of course, is going to hold with respect to racism. Suppose I'm a racist. I don't like brown people. But I'm in business, and I'm selling stuff. Right? And this brown person comes into my store and says, I want to buy $100,000 worth of what you have. Oh no, I can't take $100,000 because I don't like brown people. Well, maybe I will make that decision. Right? That's a pretty big hit. To the extent that I have a profit motive, I'd be more willing to say, okay, I will deal with the brown person civilly because I want the money. And of course, as I start to deal with people of different races and ethnicities, I say, well, they're not so bad, right? After all, maybe my preconceptions and prejudices start to go away. So that's this argument here. That's precisely in the liberal societies as a matter of principle and as a matter of incentive that we find the applying of racism and sexism. This is the 13th argument. Making progress. Liberal societies are more peaceful societies. If you look at this argument historically, think of, take two more liberal societies in the modern world, say England and France. Go before the modern world. Say, I'm not as much of an ancient person as our previous speaker. For me, the modern world starts around 1700, but go before, say, 1700s and consider the history of England and France. I don't know if you've read this stuff at all, but what was the relationship between the English and the French? Or the Italians and the Spanish? It's not good. It's constant war. And the decision makers, the kings and the aristocrats, right, they're constantly looking for excuses to go to war with each other. Because under those systems, how do you achieve your big life goals? Well, it's about augmenting your political power. And how do you get more political power? Well, if I'm the duke here and you're the earl over there, I become a bigger deal by conquering you and taking your stuff. And so that is largely war. And it's the same in world history. Anytime you have dictatorships, feudalisms, and even most tribalisms are very militaristic in their cultural ethos. So that's how you prove that you're a man and augment your status and power within society, right, and so forth. But then England and France, to come back to those two examples, they became liberal, right, in the modern sense in the 1700s. England had its glorious revolution in the late 1600s, and gradually, with some back and forth, it became more liberal as we think of it in the modern sense. France, more pyrotechnically, had its revolution in 1789. Then they had Napoleon after that for about 20 years. But then by 1815, France is on the road to becoming a modern democratic republic, more liberal. When was the last time France and England had a war? Next year will be the 200th anniversary. That's awesome. Take the previous 200 years. How many wars did France and England have? I don't think I can count that. But it's dozens, right, of wars, right, in the previous 200 centuries and so forth. Now, why is this? Right? Well, the argument then is because they both largely became liberal societies, and that included commerce. Right? And when people start to trade with each other, their incentives change. So there you are, you're an English business owner, right? And your suppliers are over there in France, wherever your raw materials are. Right? For you to make money, you need to get your supplies from France. Right? So you don't want your country to go to war with France, because that means the trade routes are going to be disrupted. That means the factory that's making your raw materials there is going to be bombed. That means that as a matter of political principle, the guy with whom you're doing the deals, you won't be able to do deals with him, right, anymore. So if you're in business with people in other countries, you want peace, because that will enable you to continue to trade with them, and that will enable you to remain profitable. So the logic is that argument, but also it's the historical argument you can make. Look at the societies that became commercial, right, in the modern liberal sense, and you'll find that they are much less warlike. Of course, wars still occur, but the number of wars, the destructiveness of those wars between the liberal societies has gone down. Now, I should say there's two labels that are given to this. One is sometimes called the capitalist peace thesis, and there's a whole social science literature there you can explore. It's got a cutesy name as well. It's sometimes called the no two countries with a McDonald's have ever gone to war with each other. So you take McDonald's, right, as a symbol of kind of mass market capitalism, right, in the modern world. Countries that have McDonald's don't go to war with each other anymore. Check that one out. There might be exceptions, but certainly the tendency is there. And then, of course, we contrast those countries with countries that don't have a McDonald's. And if you actually just look at where most of the wars currently are being fought, it's not in the liberal countries at all. It's also sometimes called the democratic peace thesis. And the argument there is that, yeah, the free market part is important, but it's also the democratic and republican political institutions that are important. And maybe it's some combination of those two that needs to be worked out. All right, that's 13 arguments. I've got a handout here just as a takeaway. What I want to do for the next few minutes is march through some of the big name thinkers for more. None of these arguments is original to me. All I've done here is gather and put together into what I think is a nice, pretty picture. How all the arguments are related to each other. But for this point about individual freedom being the fundamental moral value that any decent civilized society has to respect, Rand is the most famous person associated with that. This last line here, the moral justification of capitalism lies in the fact that it's the only system consonant with man's rational nature. We are smart people. We think for ourselves, make our own decisions in our lives. Now you can check that out. The most prominent name associated with the powerful incentivizing effects of the free market is Milton Friedman, Nobel Prize winner in economics, who was just up the road for much of his career at the University of Chicago. Here's a quotation from Friedman. It might be that compulsion, so you can make people, order people to do various things, can be substituted for the incentive of reward, but I doubt that it could. You shuffle inanimate objects around, one can compel individuals to be at certain places at certain times, but one can hardly compel individuals to put forth their best efforts. You can't make people work hard by external force. It has to come from within. So you have to have a system, you want to have a prosperous system that lets people be motivated. And the best motivator is people deciding for themselves what matters to them and being free to act that way. Most famous name associated with the knowledge argument, that the most important economic asset we have is knowledge, information. So how societies use the knowledge that's available in society is going to be the best predictor of how prosperous they become. Friedrich Hayek, also his teacher Ludwig von Mises should get a certain amount of credit here. Hayek largely got the Nobel Prize for this insight here. A system in which the knowledge of the relevant fact is dispersed among many people, prices can act to coordinate separate actions of different people. In your economics class, you'll sometimes hear reference to Adam Smith and the invisible hand of the market. That's a metaphor. Hayek and Mises were among the first to unpack that metaphor, figure out how the price system and the decentralized knowledge coming to be coordinated through impersonal mechanisms, right, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where to look for more on that one. To give some props to Adam Smith here, he has some early work version of that. I'm going to skip right over that. Joseph Schumpeter is the name most associated with the creativity and innovation that free market capitalist economies have. It's interesting that this phrase here, the perennial gale of creative destruction, if you do a search with Professor Google of the most cited phrases in the social science literature, this is the second most cited phrase, creative destruction, innovation, creativity, building the better mousetrap and constantly improving it. You can look for more in the Schumpeterian literature. Ludwig von Mises is most, in my judgment, associated with arguing that what makes capitalism good or liberalism good is its improvement of the average standard of living or making the common person on average better off. So this is from one of his books. He's saying the marvelous achievements of the last 200 years, unprecedented improvement of the average standard of living. And so hitting that button hard all the way through. There's a younger group of market-friendly thinkers called Bleeding Heart Libertarians. And this is their logo here. What they want to argue is, look, we say lots of good things that come out of liberalism and so forth, but in their judgment, the thing that's most important is evaluating the goodness or badness of a society is its effect on the poorest and weakest members of that society. And so the argument here is a quotation. The moral justification of our institutions depends on how well these institutions serve the interests of the poor and the least advantaged. So they're not as interested in the effects on the average person, the common person, or just people being free for whatever reason, but they have a target group in mind, and that's the justification there. Bertrand de Jouvenel, more sophisticated French name, I think it's kind of appropriate. His major argument for the importance of liberal societies is that it frees up the creative geniuses in the arts, in the sciences, in intellectual life, and so forth. If you're interested in that, the Ethics and Redistribution, a book published in 1952, that makes that case. That what we want in a society is to unleash the geniuses, so to speak. Of course, some of us might be geniuses, but even if we're not geniuses, we want to have as many geniuses as we can in our society because they're the ones who are going to do the awesome things that will inspire us. Right? More Olympic Games, more world-class movies, more awesome artists, more scientific achievements and so forth, and those will benefit us, but we are only going to get those people if we have a certain kind of society. John Stuart Mill is most associated with making the argument of happiness, and interestingly, having a society with diversity and uniqueness and unusual individuals. Particularly if you read chapter 3 of his famous book on liberty, you can find a very powerful argument in that direction. John Locke made many of the arguments that we looked at today, but I'm going to use him for the argument for religious toleration. It really was John Locke's arguments, published in the 1690s, as Europe was coming out of about a century and a half of just horrific religious civil war. Catholics persecuting Protestants, Protestants persecuting Catholics, Protestants persecuting other Protestants, everybody persecuting the Jews and Muslims. Just awful death toll, lives devastated, right, and so forth. And so by the time we get to the end of the 1600s, the idea that really we need to separate political power from religious conscience and leave people free to do their own religious thing. To a large extent, John Locke is your man if you like that line of argument. So his letter concerning toleration is making this point philosophically. I won't read the whole thing to you. He's saying Religious belief doesn't mean anything if you haven't chosen it for yourself. You're just going through the motions, following rituals because other people are doing it in your society, or you are afraid of social ostracism or political punishment. That's not what religion is. Religion, like most important things in life, has to come from within. It has to be something that you choose in whatever form that you judge to be best. So that philosophical is. Okay. Here we've got a whole bunch of claims that I've made over the course of the talk here. It increases freedom, increases productive effort, innovation. It's one that best utilizes knowledge. It makes us richer, benefits everyone, economically, improves civil society, that's the nonprofit sector, increases people's happiness, society's more interesting, decreases intolerance of various sorts, decreases sexism and racism, and increases peace. Now, your question, we a lot of thinking on your part, I hope, over the course of many years, are those claims true? And as far as I can tell, this is where the cutting edge of the current debate is. These are the 13 most important arguments about liberalism that generate the most debate, rather. All of them, of course, are hotly contested. You can find lots of people who are opposed to liberalism in various respects. And there's a very vigorous set of arguments on every single one of them. I recommend that if you are interested in political theory, social theory in general, make it a point to look for the arguments on the other side, right, from what I have presented today. Right? Lots of articulate defenders, right, of each of those. The other thing that I would like to stress here is that you'll notice when we're running through the arguments, I'm a philosopher, right, by training, and I was, as much as possible, stressing some philosophical points. But if you are going to do this well, you can't just know philosophy. A lot of the arguments I made turned on economics. You have to know a lot about economics. A lot of them turned on political theory, the nature of political institutions. You have to put your time in learn some political theory. So a lot of the claims turned on some sociological claims and some psychological claims. You can't ignore that. And certainly I threw in, as a size, a whole lot of historical claims. We often debate these things in terms of big case studies about the Industrial Revolution and the Great Depression, right, and so forth. So what I would say is, this is my closing remark before we can turn to questions here, is don't be too quick to have really firm opinions on these issues. Have opinions on them, but be willing to change your mind and expect that it's going to be several years after you put your time in. Done some philosophy, some economics, some political theory, you paid attention in history class, right, and so forth, so you don't have to repeat it next semester, because the history professor would like to say. Then put it all together and make the claim on this assessment here. All right, I'm going to stop there for today. How much time do we have for questions?
About 15 minutes.
15 minutes, perfect. Let's do it. Sir, after that.
Oh.
Ma'am.
You go back to your John Locke slide.
Quotation?
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to write down the date.
Yeah. Letter concerning toleration in 1689. Locke, when he was a young man, was born when England was going through its civil war, a horrible mix of politics. England's going back and forth between kind of democracy and monarchy, but also religion is mixed up in it. And by the time he was middle-aged, he was just disgusted at the havoc that the wars had wrought, but also just the breakdown of civil society. Neighbors hating each other, families divided right amongst themselves. And the argument always was right, that either the state or the state in combination with the church should have power over people's religious lives. The religion is important. Some people don't do it very well, so we need to make people be religious. And so that terrible mix of religious people using politics, political people using religion for their own agendas, destroyed society. The only principled way to do it is separate the two, let individuals make their own conscience and try to persuade each other. Let's go for treating people as reasonable beings who can think. That's how we're going to make social progress. That's logical. Sir?
Why do you think liberal institutions like the countries of China and Russia are so powerful today?
Why? Largely, I think it's the weight of history. Both of those cultures, speaking very general, right? Cultural traditions ingrained over the course of many generations where people are not taught to think for themselves or not encouraged to be unique as individuals. There's an old famous proverb, right? It's a Russian proverb that says it's only the empty head of grain that stands above the rest. So if you think of a field of wheat, they're all at the same level. And which one stands up? Well, it's the one that sort of kind of dropped its seed. So it's an empty-headed, foolish person. In the Chinese tradition, there's much more of an emphasis on social conformity and not disturbing certain social dynamics that are in place. So I would say Russia and China, they certainly have made progress as far as I can tell over the course of the last generation, but they do have the weight of tradition. Also, of course, what happens is once centralized political institutions come into place, and you have people who have control, it's very hard to dislodge them. That's why in many cases, the countries that have become liberal in history, it did take war or civil war to get rid of the previous generation of dictators. So it's the weight of tradition and it's the institutionalization, right, of power. Let's say, interestingly, in the Western tradition, I don't think of these as Western ideas, even though historically they did first get most explicitly enunciated and institutionalized in some Western cultures. But I don't think of them as Western ideas because I think of them as human ideas. Or humans are humans. We all need the same basic things materially and psychologically. So by calling them Western ideas, it's a historical label, not a philosophical label. But you can go back about 500 years ago, and the word innovation or innovator, you just read the literature. Whenever it appears, it's always a dirty word. We think of something as innovation. Actually, in marketing, my understanding is that the most popular word that marketers like to use is the word new. So we have a culture that celebrates the new, the innovative, right, the different. But that was not the case in our culture 500 years ago. Anybody who was an innovator often had the word rash, right, in front of it. He's doing something bad, so to speak, the tried and true. Who are you to think that you can improve on what the great minds of past tradition have discovered? That all of the important truths have already been discovered and enunciated and institutionalized in society, and your job is to revere that tradition and carry it on to the next generation. So we don't have time for this, but there were some very exciting things that started to happen in Western Europe in the 1500s and on into the 1600s to start being willing to question tradition, to come up with the idea that maybe we don't know everything, maybe there are lots of new things to explore, and then once that cat was out of the bag, so to speak, it snowballed, and a few centuries later we have a culture that institutionalizes and encourages